Lena never imagined she'd be working late on a Friday night, but that was the reality of being a single mother and a waitress at the Blue Ridge Diner, a small, family-owned restaurant on the edge of town. The hours were long, the pay wasn't much, and her tips depended on the kindness of strangers. She had gotten used to the late-night rush, the clattering of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the flicker of the neon sign outside. But tonight, something felt different. As she glanced at the clock, she realized it was past midnight. The last table was still occupied, a couple sitting in the corner booth, the fancy booth. The kind of booth where people who had too much money seemed to sit. Lena could always tell. They had that air about them, the polished, perfectly coiffed, "I don't have time for this" attitude. Lena couldn't help but glance over at them. The woman, in a bright red dress, was sipping wine and laughing with her companion. Her laughter was loud, almost obnoxious. Her hand brushed her perfectly styled hair behind her ear. The man, in a designer suit, leaned back, checking his watch every few minutes, clearly impatient. Lena took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. They had been rude since they arrived, making snide remarks when they ordered, tipping less than $1 on their initial drinks. But Lena didn't let it bother her. She was used to it. After all, she had bills to pay, a daughter to care for, and a reputation to uphold. Still, tonight felt different. As Lena approached the table to check on them, the woman looked up from her phone, her lips curling into a smirk. "Taking your sweet time, huh?" the woman said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I can't believe you're still here at this hour. Don't you have better things to do with your life?" Lena froze for a moment, not sure how to respond. She had heard these kinds of comments before, but tonight, something about it felt personal. Before Lena could say anything, the man chimed in, his voice condescending. "I mean, how pathetic must it be to be a waitress working these late shifts? You should be home with your kid, or is the money that important?" Lena's face flushed, but she swallowed her anger. She had been through worse. But tonight, for some reason, their words stung more than usual. Her daughter, Ava, had just started high school. Lena had promised herself she wouldn't let her little girl see how tough things had become. Instead of responding, Lena just nodded politely. "Is there anything else I can get you?" The woman shook her head dismissively, as if Lena were a nuisance. "No, we're fine. But you might want to rethink your career choice," she said, lowering her voice. "You might end up dying in this greasy diner if you don't." The man chuckled. The woman tossed a few bills on the table, a meager tip compared to what she should have left. Lena's heart ached. She fought the urge to cry. She had worked so hard to make ends meet. To show Ava that life was more than just the cards you were dealt. But sometimes, it felt like she was invisible. She turned and walked back to the counter, her hands shaking as she collected the dirty dishes. She couldn't stop thinking about what they had said. Maybe it was time for a change. Maybe she could do better than this. But as she set the last plate down in the kitchen, something unexpected happened. The door to the back office opened, and in stepped Mr. Whitaker, the owner of the Blue Ridge Diner. He was a quiet man, always dressed in a plain shirt and jeans. He usually kept to himself. But tonight, he had something on his mind. "Lena," he called to her, his voice serious. Lena turned, surprised to see him standing there. "Yes, Mr. Whitaker." He walked over to her, a calm look on his face, but his eyes were sharp. Calculating. "I just got a call," he said, pausing for a moment. "About that couple sitting in the booth." Lena's heart pounded. "I overheard what they said to you," Mr. Whitaker continued. "And I need you to listen carefully, Lena. I don't tolerate that kind of behavior in my restaurant." Lena blinked. She had worked here for over 5 years, but Mr. Whitaker had never spoken to her like this before. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but she could feel something important was about to happen. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm saying that I've seen how you work," he said, his voice steady. "And I've seen how you've been treated by certain people. But I've also seen how you keep your head down and do your job. You're loyal, you're hardworking, and you deserve better than the treatment you got tonight." Lena was speechless. Mr. Whitaker raised a hand, cutting her off. "I'm offering you something tonight, Lena. I'm offering you a chance." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Starting tomorrow," he continued, "I want you to take over as the manager of this place. You'll have full control. A salary. Benefits. No more late nights waiting on people who don't know your worth." Lena's mouth dropped open. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "I've been watching you for a while," he said. "You've got what it takes. You deserve to be in charge here, not catering to people who treat you like dirt." Lena felt a mix of emotions. Shock. Disbelief. And an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had a real chance to change her life. Her hands trembled as she picked up a tray of dishes and walked toward the kitchen. But this time, they weren't shaking out of exhaustion or frustration. They were shaking with hope. The next morning, Lena woke up with a strange sense of excitement in her chest. It had been so long since she had felt anything but exhaustion or worry. The sunlight streamed through her bedroom window, casting a warm glow across her room. For a moment, she just lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering if last night had been a dream. But as she glanced at her phone, she saw the message from Mr. Whitaker. "I'll see you at the diner at 10. Let's talk." It was real. She wasn't dreaming. Lena quickly got dressed in her best clothes, a simple blouse and black slacks. She hadn't planned on anything extravagant, but today felt like the start of something bigger. She kissed Ava goodbye, reminded her to be careful, and left the house with a sense of purpose. When Lena arrived at the Blue Ridge Diner, it felt different. The familiar bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. But instead of the usual bustling atmosphere, there was a strange silence. The smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, but it wasn't the same as it had been the night before. Today, it was quieter. Almost expectant. As if everyone knew something had changed. Mr. Whitaker was standing by the counter, waiting for her. A calm yet determined look on his face. "Good morning," he said with a nod. "You're right on time." Lena smiled nervously, trying to hide the wave of emotions crashing through her. "Thanks for this," she said, her voice soft. "I'm not sure what to say." "No need to say anything yet," Mr. Whitaker replied. "Let's take a walk through the restaurant. I'll show you what's been going on behind the scenes. Then, you'll start seeing why I'm so sure you're the right person for the job." Lena followed him into the kitchen, her footsteps echoing against the tiled floor. She had never really been on the kitchen side of things. Only in the dining area, waiting on tables, filling drink orders, and doing the usual waitress routine. But today, things felt different. It was as though she were walking into a new world. One where she actually had a say. First off, Mr. Whitaker began as he motioned to the staff in the kitchen, "You need to understand that running this place isn't just about taking orders. It's about managing people. Making sure they feel respected. Making sure customers are happy. And making sure everything runs smoothly." Lena nodded, taking in every word. She had always been a hard worker. But she had never been in charge of anything before. She wasn't sure if she had the experience for it. But she was willing to try. They moved through the restaurant, and Mr. Whitaker introduced her to a few staff members. Some greeted her with polite smiles. The younger ones seemed curious about the change. But there was a noticeable hesitance in the older staff members' eyes. Lena could tell that some of them weren't sure how they felt about her sudden promotion. As they reached the front counter, Lena's nerves were beginning to get the better of her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if the customers didn't respect her the way they did the previous manager? But before she could dwell too much on it, Mr. Whitaker turned to face her. "This is your restaurant now, Lena. You're the manager. You set the tone here. You make the decisions. Don't let anyone tell you differently." Lena stood there, stunned. This was really happening. She was the manager. "Go ahead and make yourself comfortable," Mr. Whitaker said. "You start the job officially tomorrow. But for today, why don't you get behind the counter and try things out? Take a few orders. See how you feel." Lena hesitated for just a moment. Then, she nodded. She wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. She walked behind the counter, took a deep breath, and grabbed the pad of order slips. A few minutes later, a regular customer, Mr. Harris, walked in. He was a quiet man, always ordering the same meal, a bacon cheeseburger and fries. He smiled when he saw Lena behind the counter. But his face softened when he realized. She wasn't just taking orders today. She was running the show. "Good morning, Lena," Mr. Harris said. "You're in charge today, huh?" Lena smiled and nodded. "Yep. For today and every day from here on out." Mr. Harris chuckled. "Well, I think it's safe to say you're the right person for the job." Lena's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't much. But it was a start. A small sign that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be different from here on out. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Meetings. Small adjustments Lena hadn't anticipated. As the new manager of the Blue Ridge Diner, she had to juggle a million different things at once. Scheduling shifts. Ordering supplies. Managing customer complaints. And making sure everyone on the team felt like they had a voice. It wasn't easy. But Lena was determined to prove she could handle it. However, she quickly realized that not everyone was on board with the changes. The older employees, particularly Beth and Jason, had become increasingly distant. While they didn't outwardly oppose her, their passive-aggressive behavior was hard to miss. Lena could feel the tension every time she walked into the break room. The way Beth and Jason would glance at each other. The way their voices would drop to a whisper. The way their eyes barely concealed their disdain. But what bothered her the most was how they treated the customers. One night, a middle-aged woman came in for a quick bite. She was alone. Dressed in simple clothes. She looked a little out of place among the usual crowd of regulars. She ordered a soup and a small side. Lena made sure to check on her every few minutes. But as Lena approached the table, she noticed something. Beth, standing behind the counter, giving the woman a cold look. Lena couldn't understand why it bothered her so much. But the way Beth looked at that woman. It was clear she was judging her. And Lena couldn't stand that. "Is everything okay here?" Lena asked the woman, trying to break the awkward silence. The woman looked up, startled by the question. "Oh, yes. Everything's fine," she said, smiling warmly. "The soup is just what I needed." Lena nodded. But as she turned to walk away, she caught a glimpse of Beth whispering to Jason. Her eyes flicking over to the woman. A sneer on her lips. It was a subtle exchange. But Lena knew exactly what it meant. They were making the woman feel like she didn't belong. As the night wore on, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that her leadership was being tested. Her staff was still adjusting. And some of them were clearly holding on to the old way of doing things. Where money, status, and appearances dictated who got good service. And who didn't. Later that evening, when the diner was quieter, Mr. Whitaker stopped by. He'd been observing from the back of the restaurant for the past few days. And he could see that the change Lena had brought was already starting to ruffle some feathers. "Everything going okay, Lena?" he asked, his voice calm but concerned. Lena nodded, glancing over at Beth and Jason, who were taking their break at the counter. "I think so. It's just, some of the staff aren't too happy with the changes." Mr. Whitaker's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Lena hesitated, not wanting to sound like she was complaining. But she had to speak up. "Beth and Jason," she admitted. "They're not exactly thrilled about me taking charge. They don't seem to like the idea of treating everyone equally, especially the customers who might not tip as well." Mr. Whitaker sighed, rubbing his temple. "I've seen it. They think the old system works because it keeps them in control. But that's not how we do things here anymore. You've got to stand firm, Lena. This restaurant runs on respect, respect for the customers, and respect for each other. If they can't handle that, then we'll have to deal with it." Lena nodded. She understood what he meant. She had to make it clear that things were different now. No one would be allowed to treat anyone badly, whether they were a wealthy guest or someone just passing through. But as she walked through the diner that night, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the resistance against her. Every time she made a decision, there was someone in the back of the room shaking their head. Every time she stood up to a rude customer, there was a quiet murmur of disagreement from a corner booth. It was harder than Lena had expected. She had thought she could change things quickly. But she was starting to realize that changing people's attitudes, especially long-standing ones, was going to take time. The next day, she arrived early to find a note on her desk. It was from Jason. "I'm not going to put up with this for much longer. Figure it out, or we'll be having a serious talk." Lena's stomach twisted as she read the note. She didn't know exactly what it meant, but the tone was clear. Jason was about to make things very difficult for her. She crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash, trying not to let her nerves get the best of her. She couldn't back down now. She had made a commitment to herself and to Ava that she would not only succeed, but make sure things were fair for everyone who worked there. As the shift began, Lena called a meeting with the staff. She stood in front of them, trying to project confidence, even though she felt like her insides were in knots. "Listen up, everyone," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I know things have been different lately. And I know some of you don't like the changes I'm trying to make. But I want to make one thing clear. We're all here to do a job. And we're all going to be treated with respect. That's the way it's going to be from now on. If that's a problem, then we can have a conversation. But I'm not going to let anyone undermine what we're trying to build here." There was silence for a moment. Then Beth let out a scoffing laugh. "Yeah. Good luck with that," she muttered, rolling her eyes. Jason didn't say anything, but the tension between them was thick. Lena could feel it. But she wasn't going to let it break her. "Good," Lena said, walking toward the back of the room. "We'll see how things go." That night, she worked harder than ever. She went out of her way to make sure everyone was being treated equally. She checked on every table, helped the kitchen staff, made sure the customers who came in were happy with their meals. And as the night ended, Lena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Despite the resistance from within, she had managed to keep everything running smoothly. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The weeks passed, and while things were slowly improving, the tension in the Blue Ridge Diner never fully dissipated. Lena could feel the undercurrent of resistance every time she entered the room. Whether it was a comment from Beth, or the silence from Jason as he reluctantly followed her instructions. But through it all, she remained focused. She couldn't afford to let them break her resolve. Not now. Not when she had come so far. It was a Thursday evening when things came to a head. The diner had been unusually busy, and Lena was running between tables, making sure everyone was taken care of. The clatter of dishes. The hum of voices. The occasional hiss of the kitchen. It felt like just another night. Until she noticed them. A familiar couple. Walking into the diner. The same couple from that Friday night. The ones who had humiliated her. The ones who had made cruel remarks about her life, and her job. They walked in with their usual air of superiority. Dressed in their designer clothes. As if they owned the place. Lena's stomach twisted. She hadn't seen them since that night. And part of her wanted to ignore them. Pretend they didn't exist. But she couldn't. Not when she was the manager now. Not when she was in charge. She walked up to their booth, making sure to keep her voice calm and professional. Good evening. Welcome back to the Blue Ridge Diner. How can I help you tonight? The woman glanced up at her, her lips curving into a tight smile. Oh, it's you, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The waitress from last time. I see they finally made you the manager. Congratulations. Lena took a deep breath. Forced a smile. Yes, I'm the manager now. What can I get for you tonight? The woman and her companion exchanged a glance. Lena could feel their judgmental eyes on her. They weren't going to make this easy. She knew that. But she wasn't going to let them get under her skin. Just bring us a bottle of your best wine, the man said dismissively, flipping through the menu as if Lena weren't even there. Lena nodded and turned to leave. But then. She overheard the woman whisper to her companion. Just loud enough for her to hear. It's funny how they think that being nice to people will get them anywhere. The only thing that matters is money. And they're always going to be stuck in places like this. Lena clenched her fists. Her nails dug into her palms. She wanted to turn around. Call them out for their ignorance. Their cruelty. But she didn't. Instead, she walked to the bar. Grabbed the wine they had requested. And set it on their table. Without saying a word. For the rest of the evening, she focused on the other tables. On the customers who treated her with respect. The ones who appreciated the effort she put into her work. But as the night wore on, Lena couldn't stop thinking about the couple. About the way they had treated her. About the way they had judged her. Without knowing a thing about her life. It wasn't just about them. It was about everything. The years of hard work. The sacrifices. The late nights. The constant battle to stay afloat. The idea that someone could look at her. And think she didn't deserve more. That she wasn't capable of something better. It stung. When the night finally ended, Lena was the last one to leave. She locked up the diner, her mind still reeling from the encounter with the couple. But as she stepped outside into the cool night air, she saw something that stopped her in her tracks. Mr. Whitaker. Standing by his car. Looking at her with a thoughtful expression. You're still here? She asked, surprised. Is everything okay? Mr. Whitaker nodded. His eyes scanned the parking lot. I wanted to talk to you, Lena. I've been watching. And I think it's time we have a conversation about something important. Lena felt a flicker of anxiety. What's going on? Come on, he said, motioning for her to follow. Let's take a walk. They walked down the sidewalk in silence for a few minutes. The streetlights cast long shadows on the pavement. Finally, Mr. Whitaker spoke. I know this hasn't been easy for you, he said. And I know you're facing a lot of resistance from some of the staff. But I want you to understand something. This restaurant is yours now. You've proven that you have what it takes to lead. And I believe in you. Lena blinked. Surprised. But I'm not sure they believe in me. Not everyone's on board, she admitted. Beth and Jason. They're not the ones you need to worry about, Mr. Whitaker interrupted gently. You've done more in the last few weeks than I ever expected. You've made a difference. And that's what matters. Lena felt a surge of pride. But the weight of her worries still lingered. But what about the customers, she asked. What if they don't respect me? Mr. Whitaker's gaze was steady. Respect is earned, Lena, he said. And you've earned it. There's always going to be people who look down on you. But you know what? They're the ones who don't matter. They'll come and go. But the people who truly see your worth, they'll stick around. And they'll be the ones who appreciate everything you do. Lena felt her chest tighten. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words. It was more than just about running the diner. It was about believing in herself. Thanks, Mr. Whitaker, she said quietly. I needed to hear that. He smiled. A small, but genuine expression. Anytime, Lena. Now go get some rest. You've earned it. As Lena walked back to her car, the weight of the night felt a little lighter. She still had a long way to go. There would be more challenges. More resistance. And more moments of doubt. But for the first time in a long time, Lena felt like she was on the right path. She was ready to face whatever came next. The following week brought a new energy to the Blue Ridge Diner. One that Lena wasn't sure she could explain. The atmosphere had shifted. Subtle. But undeniable. It was in the way the staff moved. In the way customers greeted her when they walked in. And in the way the usual tension had begun to fade. Lena had expected resistance. Especially from Beth and Jason. But what she hadn't anticipated was how their disdain began to affect the others. Slowly. It started to spread. A few of the older servers, who had always followed Beth's lead, were beginning to question her behavior. The constant whispers. The subtle undermining of Lena's authority. People were starting to notice. Lena was doing her best to remain calm. To keep the diner running smoothly. But it wasn't always easy. Every day felt like a balancing act. Between maintaining her newfound authority and navigating the fragile relationships with her employees. But as the days passed, Lena began to realize that the changes she was making weren't just in the way the staff treated each other. They were in the way the customers saw the diner. One afternoon, Lena was sitting at the counter, reviewing the week's receipts. When the door opened, and a familiar face walked in. It was Mr. Harris. The quiet regular who had been so kind to her when she first became manager. He smiled when he saw her. And Lena felt a wave of gratitude rush over her. She had been feeling the strain of managing a business. But Mr. Harris always made her feel like she was doing something right. Good afternoon, Lena, he said, sliding into his usual seat. How's everything going? Lena smiled back, trying to mask the exhaustion that had been creeping up on her. It's going well. Just a little hectic. You know how it is. He chuckled softly. Yeah, I can imagine. You're running the place now, huh? That's a big step. Lena nodded. Her fingers lightly tapping on the counter. Yeah, it is. A lot of changes. Some people aren't too happy about it. But we're getting there. Mr. Harris leaned forward slightly. His voice always quiet. You know, Lena. I've been coming here for a long time. And I've noticed something in the last couple of weeks. There's been a shift. The place feels different. The food's always been good. But the energy here. It's changed for the better. Lena blinked in surprise. Really? He nodded. I don't know if it's you being in charge or what. But it's noticeable. I've never seen the staff so engaged. It's refreshing. And I think the customers notice it too. Lena's heart swelled. She had been so focused on the negative. The resistance. The subtle sabotage. But she had missed the small victories. The things that were actually working. She hadn't realized how much the positive changes were already taking root. Thank you, Mr. Harris, she said softly. Her voice filled with gratitude. That means a lot to me. As she turned to grab his usual order, she felt a shift within herself as well. She was still dealing with some difficult people. People who resented her for taking charge. People who would rather see her fail. But now, she had the validation she needed. It wasn't just about making the diner run efficiently. It was about creating an atmosphere of respect. A place where people felt seen. And valued. That night, Lena decided to take a different approach. After the dinner rush had ended, she asked everyone to gather in the break room. The tension in the room was palpable. She could feel the eyes on her. Beth and Jason were sitting together. Arms crossed. Clearly unamused. The others were scattered around. Unsure of what to expect. I know things have been a little tense lately, Lena started. Her voice calm but firm. And I know not everyone agrees with the changes I've been making. But I want to make something clear. This place is about more than just serving food. It's about respect. And I expect that from all of you. She let the words hang in the air for a moment. Before continuing. I've been doing my best to make this a better place for all of us. But if anyone feels like they can't be part of that, then maybe it's time we part ways. The room was silent. No one said anything at first. And Lena could feel the tension rising. But then, to her surprise, one of the younger servers, Maria, spoke up. I think what Lena is saying is true, Maria said. Her voice soft, but clear. Things have changed around here. And it's been good for all of us. We're working better as a team. I'm not saying it's perfect. But I've seen the difference. Lena was shocked. She hadn't expected any support from the staff. Especially not from someone so new. But Maria's words broke the silence. And slowly, others began to nod in agreement. It wasn't a full-on show of unity. But it was something. Beth scoffed. Clearly irritated. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. I don't have to take orders from anyone. Lena met her gaze. Her expression hardening. Then you don't have to stay, Beth. This is about respect. And if you can't give that, then you're free to go. There was a long pause. And for a moment, Lena thought Beth might storm out. But instead, she rolled her eyes. And crossed her arms tighter. Fine. Whatever. The meeting ended shortly after. With everyone returning to their tasks. Lena couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. It wasn't much. But it was progress. For the first time, she had taken a stand. And while not everyone was on board yet, she could feel the shift beginning. The next few weeks felt like a continuous test of Lena's patience. She had made progress. Some of the staff were starting to embrace the changes she'd implemented. But others, like Beth and Jason, remained stubbornly resistant. The restaurant's atmosphere, though better than it had been, was still filled with tension. Lena knew she had to keep pushing forward. But it wasn't easy. One Friday evening, Lena found herself dealing with a difficult customer. One who was rude and demanding. The kind that seemed to think they could get away with anything. Because they were paying for a meal. She had been warned about this kind of behavior. Especially since the diner had become more popular under her management. But even so. When it happened. It still stung. The man was sitting at a corner booth with his wife. Already making a scene. As soon as Lena approached the table, he looked up at her with a condescending smile. His voice dripping with sarcasm. "Finally, the manager graces us with her presence," he said. Loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "I was starting to think you were too busy with your power trip to check on your tables." Lena kept her expression neutral. Forcing herself not to react. "I'm sorry for the wait, sir. Is everything to your liking?" The man scoffed. Clearly displeased. "Everything's fine, I guess. But I'll be honest, this place isn't what it used to be. The service used to be faster. And the food? Not nearly as good as I remember." Lena's stomach tightened. She had been working harder than ever to make sure the food quality and service were top-notch. She couldn't understand why this man was acting this way. But instead of letting him get under her skin, she took a deep breath. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said. Her voice steady. "Is there anything I can do to make your experience better tonight?" The man looked her up and down. As if assessing her worth. "Yeah. Maybe fire that cook in the back. He's ruining the meals here. And if you're the manager, you should be on top of it, shouldn't you?" Lena's heart skipped a beat. But she remained calm. "I'll make sure to pass your feedback along," she said, turning to leave. But as she walked away, she could feel the sting of his words. She had worked so hard to turn things around at the Blue Ridge Diner. And this man was acting as if everything she'd done meant nothing. But it wasn't the first time she had been tested. And it wouldn't be the last. As the night went on, Lena did her best to stay focused. Moving from table to table. Checking on customers. Making sure everyone was happy. But when the couple finished their meal and walked toward the register to pay, the man made one last remark. "You know," he said, smirking. "You should really rethink your management strategy. This place isn't going to last long if you keep running it like this." Lena's patience was wearing thin. But she bit her tongue. And forced a smile. "Thank you for your feedback, sir. Have a good night." After they left, Lena found herself standing in the middle of the dining room. Trying to shake off the frustration. It wasn't the first time a customer had been rude to her. But tonight, it felt like a personal attack. It wasn't just about the diner. It was about everything. The work. The sacrifice. The constant pressure to do more. To be more. She was giving everything. And yet, some people still treated her like she was invisible. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door jingling. She turned. To see a familiar face walking through the door. It was Mr. Whitaker. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to come in tonight. But the sight of him brought a wave of relief. For a moment, she forgot about the rude customer. And the weight of the evening. Instead, she walked over to him with a genuine smile. "Hey, Mr. Whitaker," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't expect you tonight." He smiled back. His eyes scanning the room as he made his way toward the counter. "Just wanted to see how things were going. I've been hearing good things about the place lately." Lena's smile faltered slightly. "I don't know about that. We had a bit of a rough night with a customer. But, you know. It's part of the job." He looked at her thoughtfully. His gaze intense but kind. "It is. And you're doing the right thing, Lena. Don't let one bad experience shake your confidence. You've got what it takes to make this place succeed. I've seen it. Lena exhaled, her shoulders relaxing a little. Thanks, Mr. Whitaker. I needed to hear that. He nodded, his tone serious. I know it's hard. You've got a lot on your plate. But you've got to stay true to yourself. Keep doing what you're doing. And the rest will follow. Lena felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had been feeling like she was fighting a battle every single day. But hearing those words from Mr. Whitaker gave her the strength to push forward. As he sat down to order his usual, Lena turned back to the counter, her mind racing with the events of the night. It wasn't easy being a manager, especially when the resistance felt so personal. But she had to keep going. She had to prove, not only to her staff, but to herself, that she was capable of running this diner. She couldn't let a few bad experiences knock her off course. Just as she started to focus on the next task at hand, Lena noticed something strange. Beth was standing near the back door, watching her, with an unreadable expression. It was rare for Beth to show any sign of emotion. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes. Lena's heart skipped a beat. Was this the beginning of change? Or was it just another obstacle she would have to face? Before she could think more on it, a voice interrupted her thoughts. Lena? Mr. Whitaker called from his seat. Everything okay? Lena took a deep breath, squared her shoulders. Yeah. Everything's fine. But as she walked back toward the counter, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The days after Mr. Whitaker's visit felt different. Lena couldn't shake the sense that things were beginning to shift, in a way she hadn't anticipated. She could feel it in the way the staff interacted. The subtle change in tone. The slight but noticeable effort from the team to adjust to her management style. But with those changes came the realization that not everyone was as eager to adapt. Beth and Jason were still causing trouble. Though now, they were being a little more subtle. Instead of outright defiance, they began undermining Lena in quiet, passive ways. A whispered comment here, a sarcastic remark there. They still hadn't outright left. But their passive-aggressive behavior was becoming unbearable. One evening, just as Lena was refilling drinks at the counter, she overheard a conversation between the two of them. They weren't trying to hide it. They were speaking loudly enough for Lena to hear. Every word. You really think she's got what it takes to run this place? Beth scoffed. She's nothing more than a waitress who got lucky. Jason chuckled, leaning against the counter. I'm not sticking around for this circus much longer. She doesn't know the first thing about managing a real restaurant. Let's see how long she lasts. Lena's heart raced. But she didn't react. She kept her face neutral as she turned to grab a tray of plates. She was used to the tension. She was used to their belittling. But that didn't make it any easier to bear. That night, the dinner rush was especially hectic. The diner was full, and the staff was moving at a frenetic pace. Lena was running between the kitchen and the dining area, checking on tables, taking orders, doing everything she could to keep the flow moving smoothly. But through it all, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then it happened. A woman came in with her husband and kids, looking for a quick meal. They were regulars, the kind of customers Lena knew well. But as Lena approached the table to take their order, she noticed something that sent a cold chill through her body. Beth was already at the table, acting as though Lena didn't exist. She was leaning over the table, laughing and chatting with the woman as if they were best friends. Completely ignoring the fact that it was Lena's responsibility to serve that table. Lena stopped dead in her tracks. Her stomach tightening. She had seen this kind of thing before. The subtle undermining. The way Beth tried to take control whenever Lena wasn't looking. But this time. It was too much. She had had enough. Taking a deep breath, Lena walked over to the table. Her voice steady as she addressed the customers. "Excuse me. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Is there anything I can get started for you?" Beth's eyes narrowed. Her expression cold. "Oh, we're fine, Lena," she said. Her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I've already got everything under control." Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She could feel the anger bubbling up inside her. This wasn't just about a customer. It was about respect. About the boundaries Beth had crossed. Over and over again. But this time. Lena wasn't going to back down. "No," Lena said. Her voice sharp. "I'll be taking care of them tonight, Beth." The tension in the room was palpable. For a moment. It felt like the entire diner was holding its breath. Even the customers seemed to sense that something was happening. The atmosphere had shifted. And it wasn't the usual calm of the Blue Ridge Diner. Beth glared at Lena. But for once. She didn't say anything. Instead. She huffed. Tossed her apron onto the counter. And walked out of the dining area. Jason, who had been watching from the back. Didn't say a word either. But Lena could feel his eyes burning into her. Lena turned back to the family at the table. Forcing a smile onto her face. "I'm sorry about that. Let's get you all settled in." But inside. Her mind was racing. She couldn't ignore what had just happened. Beth's behavior had crossed a line. And Lena knew it. She could feel the weight of the situation settling in. If she didn't do something about this, the damage would be irreversible. As the evening wore on, Lena found herself unable to focus. Every time she walked past Beth or Jason, she felt a growing sense of dread. She was beginning to understand just how difficult it would be to make the changes she needed. Not just with the customers, but with the staff. There were some people, it seemed, who were never going to accept her as their leader. The night ended without incident. But as the last customer walked out the door, Lena's thoughts were already focused on the inevitable conversation she would have to have with Mr. Whitaker. The next morning. The following morning, Lena arrived at the Blue Ridge Diner early. The weight of the previous night's events still heavy on her shoulders. She had spent the entire night thinking about what had happened with Beth and Jason. It was clear that they weren't going to change without some kind of intervention. But Lena wasn't sure what to do next. She had already given them chances. And they had continued to test her patience. As she unlocked the door to the diner, she found Mr. Whitaker already there. Waiting by the counter. His expression was calm. But Lena could see the concern in his eyes. "Good morning, Lena," he said. His tone steady, but kind. "I've been hearing about the situation. Are you okay?" Lena nodded. Her heart heavy with the decisions she knew she had to make. "I'm fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "But things aren't getting any easier. Beth and Jason. They're making it impossible to run this place the way it needs to be run." Mr. Whitaker studied her for a moment. Then nodded. "I know. And I've been watching how you've handled it. I've seen the way you've stepped up. The way you've worked to make things right. But sometimes, change doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes, it requires a little more." Lena swallowed hard, trying to process his words. I don't want to give up on them, Mr. Whitaker. I really don't. But they're undermining everything I'm trying to build. I'm not sure how much longer I can let this go on. He sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. It's tough, I can see that. But the truth is, Lena, you can't change people who don't want to change. You can't force respect where it isn't given. And sometimes, the best thing for the business, and for yourself, is to make tough decisions. Lena's stomach twisted. She knew what he meant. But the idea of firing someone, especially after everything she had worked for, was terrifying. But deep down, she knew he was right. If she didn't take control now, things would only get worse. I think it's time, Lena said quietly. More to herself than to Mr. Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker nodded. Then you know what you need to do. This restaurant has a future, Lena. But it can't grow if you're constantly fighting the past. Lena took a deep breath, feeling a surge of determination rise within her. She had come too far to let fear control her now. She walked to the back office, where she found Beth and Jason chatting quietly, as if nothing had happened. They looked up when she entered. And for the first time, Lena felt the weight of their gaze shift. From disdain to something else. Maybe fear. Beth. Jason, she said, her voice firm. I need to speak with both of you. They exchanged a glance. But neither of them said anything. Lena didn't give them a chance to protest. I've tried to make this work. I've tried to lead with fairness. With respect, she began. Her eyes meeting theirs, one by one. But the way you've been treating this place, and the way you've been undermining my decisions, can't continue. It's affecting the entire team. And the customers. And it's not what I stand for. Beth scoffed, crossing her arms. So what? You're going to fire us now? Lena nodded. Yes. This isn't a place for division. I can't afford to have employees who don't share the same vision for this diner. Jason opened his mouth to argue. But Lena cut him off. I've already made my decision. You're both done here. I'm giving you one last chance to leave with some dignity. The silence in the room was thick. Beth glared at Lena, her expression hard. Jason, who had been mostly silent, looked like he was processing what was happening. You can't do this, Beth finally said, her voice venomous. You're nothing. You're just a waitress who got lucky. Lena stood tall, unshaken. I'm the manager of this place. And it's time for you to leave. Beth huffed, storming out of the room without another word. Jason followed her, muttering under his breath. But Lena didn't look back. She had done it. She had finally taken control. And the weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for so long began to lift. Later that day, as the staff settled into the new normal without Beth and Jason, Lena could feel a shift in the air. The energy in the diner was lighter, freer. The employees who had been hesitant to speak up before now had the confidence to share their ideas. They worked together as a team, respecting each other and the customers. Lena's vision for the Blue Ridge Diner was beginning to come to life. And when Mr. Whitaker came in that afternoon, he didn't say a word. He just smiled at Lena from the corner booth, his approval clear in his eyes. As the night settled in, and the last customers trickled out, Lena stood by the counter, looking around the diner. The place wasn't perfect. There were still challenges ahead. And she knew the road to success wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long while, Lena felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had fought for this. And she had earned it. Tomorrow, she would walk into work. And continue to build the Blue Ridge Diner into something special. No more pretending she didn't belong. No more second-guessing herself. Lena was the manager now. And nothing, no one, was going to take that away from her.